Hello and welcome to Press TV News Analysis. I'm Kavita Roy. In the United States, the year 2011 will be remembered, well, for promises not delivered. U.S. President Barack Obama failed to not only close Guantanamo, as was one of his campaign pledges, he rang in the new year by signing into law the NDAA law, with its provision allowing him to indefinitely detain citizens. In this news analysis, we ask, is this one of the greatest rollbacks of civil liberties in the U.S.? Well, this is while Occupy protest movements continue in the U.S., while presidential candidates are battling out for the 2012 elections.
Could be that
Occupy Iowa caucus protesters making their voices heard at the Republican presidential candidate Mitt Romney's caucus Eve rally. Other Republican presidential hopefuls were also targeted by protesters during their campaign in Iowa. The occupiers also targeted the Democratic National Committee in Iowa to protest what they call President Barack Obama's failure to deliver on his promise of change during his first term in White House.
I am a former Obama precinct captain, and I'm angry as hell with him at how he's failed to do his job.
Overall, 62 Occupy protesters were arrested during the week. Since it began more than 3 months ago, the Occupy movement has been constantly calling for getting money out of politics. The occupiers say both Republican and Democratic parties are sponsored and represented by big corporations, and therefore put corporate interests before those of the average Americans.
We just can't take seeing this country that we love broken down by petty fighting and by corrupt money flowing in to influence our politics over the voices of the people that it's supposed to represent.
The occupiers are calling on the supporters of both Democratic and Republican parties to vote uncommitted or no preference to express dissatisfaction with the status quo. Some analysts believe the Occupy movement needs to develop a more coherent and across-the-board message to leave a serious impact on the 2012 presidential elections. The occupiers say their work has just begun, and as time goes on, they will turn into a major force in the U.S. political system, which will represent the 99%.
Let's see if we can get some perspective on this. Co-director of the International Action Center, Sarah Flounders, joins us from New York. We have organizer of the Freedom Plaza occupation, Ty Barry, who is also with Code Pink, joining us from Washington. Thank you both. Sarah Flounders, first to you. Let's begin with this NDAA law. It authorizes the military to indefinitely detain U.S. citizens without trial. So anyone can be snatched, preventing an indefinite detention to prevent a true court review. Is the U.S. revisiting the McCarthy era?
Well, it is certainly attempting to. This very dangerous, unconstitutional criminal provisions in the National Defense Authorization Bill, which is a military bill, which imposes more than 1,000 U.S. bases around the world, money for endless war, for drone attacks, for aircraft carriers, for satellite surveillance, and assassination hit teams and all of that. So there's really an attempt to shut down, of course, dissension anywhere in the world, and also increasingly to do the same thing here at home. It allows the military to both intervene, to kidnap, hold in secret detention without the right to charges or trial those who are considered a security threat, which is a very vague term, as we so well know. And it really is increasingly meant to threaten the Occupy Wall Street movement, or the movements that are coming up from below, the grassroots movements that have been shown to be so courageous and viable in this past year, that spread like wildfire across the U.S. More than 100 cities where there were occupations that were shut down by the police, and again, we should say, a completely illegal action. People have the right to assembly, their right to freedom of speech, and yet when they practice it, they were shut down.
So is it a coincidence then, Sarah Flounders?
Signed by Obama.
Do you think it's a coincidence then? You're looking at Occupy protest movements about 5 months old, close to 6,000 arrests later, that this thing has come into law?
No, I don't think it's a coincidence at all. It's meant to threaten the people here in the U.S. But at the same time, we should remember that we only have the rights here in the U.S. that we fight for and fight to maintain. That the right to assembly and speech, to no charges, to have a trial by a jury, and all of that is essential in order to organize and mobilize, to fight for the right to health care, housing, education, the right to a job. If we're going to gain what we have a right to in this country, it means we have to defend the political rights that are already on the books. And yesterday, the Occupy Wall Street movement did this around the country with actions, very strong actions, disruptions, press conferences, marches, and there was also coordinated national actions on December 15th, which was the anniversary of the Bill of Rights Day, when it was passed 220 years ago. So people are increasingly alerted to the threat and are beginning to mobilize to defend their rights.
Right. And Tyke Berry, this NDAA Act, I'd like to, or law, I'd really like to expand on it more. In essence, the U.S. is bringing its so-called war and fight against terrorism overseas to mainland USA.
Yes, it is. And I'd like to say I've been in Egypt under the dictatorship of Mubarak, and the United States is beginning to mirror what I saw take place every single day on the streets of Cairo, where thugs can grab you up, put you in detention, secret detention, not tell anybody where you're at, keep you for indefinite periods of time. They've codified that there will be no more habeas corpus. Let's get clear on this. There are over 20 Yemenis who are innocent, who have been proven innocent in military courts in Guantanamo that might never see their home again. They've described this as a war on terrorism. That's a war on an idea, on a thought that could be never ending. They've already picked up Americans overseas and did rendition on them, brought them to different countries. They're being held in secret prisons. This government is beginning to look more and more like a dictatorship. And it's appalling that Obama would use a weekend of a holiday to sign this bill into law, because he knows he's let down millions and millions of his supporters nationwide that will no longer vote for him. We're going to call for a boycott on voting in these elections in the future.
I'd like to find out from you if even Obama is in a state of mind in terms of losing voters, or is he, with this enaction of this law, looking at the bigger picture in the near future of what it means in terms of the Occupy protest movements and how it is threatening somewhat the stability or lack of it in the United States?
Well, the president seems to be talking out both sides of his mouth. Today he says, we're going to pull troops out of Afghanistan. He talks about wanting to support the middle class, the 99% as opposed to the 1%. Yet he takes all his money from the 1%, and every action he does is in support of the wealthiest of the wealthy in this country. He's going to have over $1 billion to run his campaign. He no longer needs his grassroots supporters, he feels. But he'll be surprised this year when those people that were out last time in groups, the young and the people who were opposed to the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, are now going to be calling for a boycott or no vote for any of these so-called leaders in our society, the ones that are denouncing the very fundamentals of our Constitution, habeas corpus, the right to seek a judgment. Bradley Manning was held for over a year and a half, and at the opportune moment, they bring him out at the last minute to go through a mock trial, in our words, a kangaroo court. This government is going farther and farther away from the roots of our Constitution, from what the people desire. And in the end, the people, you'll see this is going to be the American spring coming up.
Okay, well, let's find out some views from Wayne Slater from Manchester, New Hampshire. He's from the Dallas Morning News. Wayne Slater, thanks for joining us here. Well, tell us your reflections on the 2012 elections, first off. I mean, we're looking at taking into account the current candidates and the results of the Iowa caucuses. I'm sure you heard by now Michelle Bachmann, a casualty already. Rick Perry, some are saying that he's going to become one also, that he may concede defeat. Or not defeat, but he's not going to run. And Ron Paul coming in third, Romney to have won it. What do you make of that? Break that down for us, if you can, and put it into perspective in terms of
well, first,
where it stands.
Rick Perry has said that he will stay in. He's going to continue to campaign in South Carolina. So he's going to stay in at least for a while, but I think you're right. His days are numbered here. The actual emergence of Ron Paul as a kind of protest candidate, as a candidate who is saying very different things, an isolationist, against the war, raising fundamental questions about the way government operates. And his popularity, relative popularity, tells you one thing about this dyspeptic, sort of unsettled electorate this election year. The other thing was the result of the New Hampshire, of the Iowa caucus, now leading to the New Hampshire primary. The caucus really didn't settle very much at all. Mitt Romney came out on top, the business candidate, moderate Republican, but not by much. Also, Ron Paul is in there, and a social conservative, religious conservative, backed by Christian conservatives and others, Rick Santorum. So what this tells you is the field remains very fractured. And the reason it remains fractured is because the electorate is simply not happy. It sees a lot of problems that it wants solved in terms of spending and the government, and it doesn't see anybody who it's really excited and emotional about to become president.
Do you think, however, the results of Ron Paul coming in third relates to the aspirations of the Occupy movement? If you can tell us the relationship to that, and especially given the fact that these Occupy protest movements are said to represent many who haven't been on the streets of the average U.S. household at this point.
Yeah, I would never say that every member of the Occupy movement in New York and Washington and elsewhere are Ron Paul supporters. They are not. But both Paul and the people who are involved in the Occupy movement are expressing themselves in a way that says business as usual can't go on. The status quo is untenable. We need to change things. Paul, at the heart, is really a populist. The Occupy movement is for not the upper 1%, but the 99%, middle income people, the working poor, and others in the United States who have seen the increase in equity in a way that makes them finally say, no, enough is enough. So what Ron Paul has done, if you go to one of his rallies, what you see are so many young people, and I've been to several of them in Iowa, and I'll go to some here in New Hampshire, so many young people who are simply unhappy with the direction of the government and see Paul, while he's flawed in some areas, as a potential repository. When I go to Ron Paul rallies, it reminds me of the 1960s in America, in which young people over the Vietnam War were rising up and saying enough.
Let's expand on what the 99% is saying, Sarah Flounders. The Occupy protest organizers, they have said every place the U.S. presidential candidates are going to go, they're going to hear the same message about the corrosive impact of money in politics. But doesn't that put the candidates in a catch-22 position? Because at the same time, they have to receive money, they have to fund their campaign, but at the same time, that affects the type of laws that may be passed. I mean, isn't this a big issue also that they need to tackle, but perhaps they're stuck between a hard and a rock place?